With both an introduction and an icon in the making, Doctor Who was slowly to start to gain steam on TV. But what's a show without good characters, who have strong relationships with each other? And from what we've seen in these last two stories, these four strangers are far from an ideal team of companions. And with trouble behind the cameras and not enough episodes to meet the show's commission, it seems that Doctor Who was in a real tight spot so soon into its run. But sometimes, desperate times call for creative solutions, and with the right mind writing the scripts, they just might be able to kill two birds with one story. The story behind how this story got made is quite interesting. So, basically, when Doctor Who was first in productions, it was with a commission of 13 episodes. By this point, however, several stories had already been written, like An Unearthly Child, which had 4 parts, The Daleks, which had 7 parts, and the next story, Marco Polo, which also had 7 parts. This left the crew with a total of 18 episodes when they had only have been given the green light for 13. They decided to leave Marco Polo on the side for a bit, and had just the first 2 stories, which only left them with a total of 11 episodes. This means they only had 2 options: either write 2 filler episodes, or have the show be off air for 2 weeks. They eventually decided to go with the first option, and the task was eventually placed on the story editor, David Whittaker, to write the 2-part story, having been informed by producer Verity Lambert that they had no budget whatsoever for new sets or guest actors, and that all that was available to him were the main 4 cast members and the set for the Tardis. You could say Whittaker had more than his work cut out for him. But sometimes, heavy restrictions bring out the need to be creative, and Whittaker decided to use his disadvantages to his advantage. You see, when you have a bunch of characters locked together in some place, and there's no external factors or much story to speak of, you have no choice but to look deeper into these characters and how they feel about each other. In what is basically the Doctor Who bottle episode, we finally get to see the release of tensions that have been rising since the Doctor, Ian, Barbara and Susan had met. And, despite it all, David Whittaker managed to finish the story in time for rehearsals, and what came next is one of the most odd, but also one of the most important Doctor Who stories out there. So, why don't we have a look? Part 1, titled The Edge of Destruction, starts with the TARDIS mid-flight when suddenly there's a crash and a blackout. All the passengers are knocked out, with Ian conveniently landing on a chair while the Doctor cracks his skull on the ground. Barbara's the first to wake up, and when she tries to wake up Ian, she calls him Mr. Chesterton.
Mr. Chesterton.
Susan wakes up next, and she also seems to be having trouble remembering Barbara, as she calls her Miss Wright. The back of her head seems to be hurting, and they see the Doctor on the floor, with his head injured. As Susan goes to get some water and bandages, Ian wakes up. He's also acting strangely, as he calls Barbara Miss Wright, and asks if she's staying late to grade papers.
Can I have a glass of water?
Susan's fetching some.
Susan Foreman, you mean?
Yes.
It seems that they've all had a minor case of amnesia, as they both don't recognize the Doctor. Meanwhile, Susan is getting bandages that look kind of funny. The Doctor moans in his sleep.
I can't take you back, Susan. I can't.
Susan tries to get water from the machine, but it reads negative. Despite that, there's still water inside. When she comes back, the doors to the TARDIS are wide open. The three wonder how the doors could have been opened themselves. Susan starts to wonder if something managed to get inside the TARDIS. Susan explains how the weird bandages she has work.
Well, what's this? The coloured part is the ointment. You'll find the colour disappearing. It goes into the wound. When the bandage is completely white, it means the wound is healed.
As Ian tries to walk through the doors, they keep opening and closing on him. Susan tries to use the controls, but...
Ow! No! Ow!
And the Oscar goes to...
The doctor starts to wake up as Ian takes the unconscious Susan back to her bed. He goes to get some water from the machine, but the thing happens before. The machine shows negative, but there's still water inside. He comes back to the room to find a bit of a surprise.
What are you doing?
No. Who are you?
She doesn't recognize Ian, who tries to get the scissors off of her before she freaks out and stabs the chair.
Ah! No! No!
Back in the console room, they discuss what's been happening. The doctor's all dripped out in his new designer headband, and Barbara echoes Susan's previous statement of something having going into the ship. The doctor and Ian don't believe her, but go to make some checks. Meanwhile, Susan creeps around the background to get her scissors back. The doctor tries checking the Tardis' fault locator, but is having trouble seeing the numbers. Ian tries to take a look for him, but is unable to. Barbara goes to find Susan awake, and as again she pulls out Mr. Cutty knife. Barbara manages to get away from her, and Susan says she feels something in the Tardis, a force that has made its way in. Barbara asks where it could be hiding.
In one of us.
Ian comes in and says the doctor's gone to check the scanner. Susan freaks out at this and runs to stop him. She says that the controls shocked her earlier when she touched them, and now she's got a pain on the back of her neck. Ian says he also has one, and so does the doctor, leaving poor Barbara out of the pain in the neck club.
Why does he keep looking at us like that?
Huh? They turn on the scanner to check what's outside. They see England on the screen and believe it to be what's outside, but when they open the door...
Close the door, someone!
I'll do it!
They manage to get the doors closed. Then another picture comes up on the screen. Susan said it's the planet Quintus, where they had almost lost the Tardis. This is the first time the series has brought up the idea that the Doctor has gone on adventures before the show began. Finally, the scanner shows a sequence.
What the hell was that?
The Doctor says it's all quite clear.
Precisely. I know now who's responsible. You are. You sabotaged my ship.
What are you doing?
He accuses the two for trying to hijack his ship to try and get them home, and that all these problems are their fault.
You're the cause of this disaster, and you both both shoot and I unconscious.
Barbara has had enough, and she lets the Doctor have it.
Turn you to England.
Oh, don't be so stupid!
I know it. I'm sure of it.
How dare you! Do you realize, you stupid old man, that you'd have died in the Cave of Skulls if Ian hadn't made fire for you?
The Doctor just stands there and takes his sword like a kid being told off by his mum. Barbara turns to leave. The clock faces have been melted off, and so have the numbers on their watches. This causes the three to be very distressed, but the Doctor comes back into the room with cups of water, acting all friendly and hospitable. The others are suspicious, but drink some anyway. Barbara decides to go to bed, and both Ian and Susan tell the Doctor to go apologise for the way he spoke to her. As Susan skulks around in the background, the Doctor gives Ian some advice.
For evil.
One man's law is another man's crime. Sleep on it, Chesterton.
Some time has passed, and everyone is fast asleep except for the Doctor. His dodgy drinks turned out to be sleeping drugs. Now with no distractions, he's free to go work on the console, but... In part 2, titled The Brink of Disaster, we see that it's Ian who's choking the Doctor. He falls to the ground and faints. Barbara tries to say that Ian obviously isn't right, and that he doesn't know what he was doing. The Doctor doesn't want to hear it though, and he believes that Ian is just pretending to be unconscious. The Doctor says that this is all just one big plot to get control of his TARDIS, and then Susan shows up acting all creepy, and sides with the Doctor. Ian wakes up, and he tries to convince Susan of their innocence. Susan starts to come around, but the Doctor is still steadfast in his beliefs. He says that he has no choice but to kick the two off the ship. Susan protests, saying that they don't know what's out there, but the Doctor won't listen. Just then, the TARDIS danger signals flashes, which causes the Doctor and Susan much distress. As he tries to figure out what's going on, Ian starts to strangle Barbara. Seeing this seems to convince the Doctor that they aren't against him, The Doctor explains that the fault locator is supposed to light up a single bulb when something goes wrong.
Can you imagine what would happen if the whole of it lights up? It means that the ship is on the point of disintegration.
He says that the ship is now on the verge of disaster. Just then, the column moves. As the column is only supposed to move when the power is on, the Doctor says that the heart of the Tardis is located underneath it. It seems that the energy from within the Tardis is trying to break free, and the Doctor says they only have 10 minutes. Barbara starts to work out what has been happening, and says that all these strange things that have been happening have been the Tardis trying to warn them. The others wonder whether or not it's just some form of defense system, or maybe that the Tardis is somewhat alive and sentient, and has been trying to warn them out of a sense of morality. The Doctor tries opening the doors, while Susan and Barbara try to take a look outside. They see nothing but a white void. Once again, the strange sequence appears on the scanner, but this time they're finally able to decipher what it means.
I know. I said it would take the force of a total solar system to attract the power away from my ship. Outside, the atoms are rushing towards each other, fusing, coagulating, until minute little collections of matter are creating. Solid entity, a new birth of a sun and its planets.
It seems that the TARDIS has been taken back to the beginning of time, where the magnetic force of a birth of a new solar system has been forcing the energy from within the TARDIS to try and break free. But the TARDIS has been trying to tell them the whole time. When they left the planet Skaro, the Doctor pushed the fast return switch to try and take them back to Earth, but it seems that the switch never unpushed itself. As the spring within the mechanism had gotten stuck, the Doctor resets the spring and the TARDIS comes back to life. It's kind of funny that the whole threat and danger of the story, and the TARDIS almost being disintegrated, was down to one little spring getting stuck. The Doctor and Ian have a nice reconciliation.
You know, there are times when I can read every thought on your face.
Really? Yes. And I always thought that you were a young man without any recrimination in you.
The Doctor tries to stay with Barbara, but she's still upset. Some time passes and the ship has landed. The Doctor goes to tell Barbara and to also make amends.
It's upsetting you, and when I made a threat to put you off the ship, it must have affected you very deeply.
What do you care what I think or feel?
As we learn about each other, so we learn about ourselves. You were determined to prove me wrong. So you put your mind to the problem, and luckily you solved it.
It seems like she finally accepts his apology, and together they walk back. Ian's wearing a funny coat, Barbara and Susan are having a snowball fight, and all in all, it seems our four have finally warmed up to each other. And it just might be smooth sailings from now on. Or will it?
Look at this huge footprint. Must be made by a giant.
Well, that was a weird one, but for just 2 episodes, it sure was a ride. David Whittaker sure had his work cut out for him, and for what is essentially filler episodes. But they aren't really, are they? Because this is a very important story for the franchise. But, on a purely story basis, what do I think of The Edge of Destruction? Well, to be honest, it's a bit of a mixed bag. But first to good. I love all the stuff to do with the main characters. With no other characters or locations to distract the audience, the gang of travellers and their inner turmoil drives the story. The way they turn it against each other and forget who each other are at the start is all great, and seeing them finally come together as a team at the end to save the day was great too. The Doctor and Barbara's scene together, where they make up, is truly the highlight of the story, and also spells the future for these characters as true companions. But, despite all that, the actual story isn't all that great. Now, of course, this is to be expected. Whittaker had a very narrow deadline and had to pull something out of his arse real quick. But for what it is, it's pretty nice. The idea of the TARDIS being the threat and trying to warn the gang of their danger, while the characters are going crazy and trying to kill each other, is good. But the explanation is a bit dodgy. The clues are way too cryptic, and no matter how many times I hear it, Barbara's explanations just don't make any sense to me. Also, like I said before, the fact that everything was caused by one little spring is kind of cheap, but I guess it's also kind of funny. So overall, while it has some great character development and a generally eerie mood, The Edge of Destruction also has a fair few story flaws, and just because of that, it doesn't really sit right with me. So I scored the story a 6 out of 10. Now, usually, I'd analyse the story and characters separately, but because there isn't too much story to speak of, I'll just mash them together. So the characters are all doing something here. First there's Susan, who's going all scared with a knife, which to be fair, is a pretty good character switch. With the TARDIS affecting the minds of its passengers, we get to see Susan, who's usually afraid of, well, everything, suddenly becoming a silent and cold figure lurking around in the background. Then we have Ian, who to be honest, has the least amount to do in this story. Aside from some amnesia and asphyxiation, he's just sort of there, though it is nice to see him reconcile with the Doctor at the end. Barbara really shines here, with her essentially saving the day. The way she puts together all the clues and having everyone either be against her or delirious really shows how strong her character is. Also, her chewing out the Doctor for being a dickhead was very satisfying, and I also believe that it is the first time in the series someone has called the Doctor out on his bullshit. Speaking of the Doctor, let's talk about the man himself. While the TARDIS poses the main threat, the Doctor is basically the antagonist of the story, with him drugging everyone and trying to kick the two teachers off the ship. We can see the tension that has been rising since these characters first met, but when they're revealed to be innocent, the Doctor changed his tune. I feel like it's obvious that the Doctor realises his mistake in judging the two, and how his judgment almost led to them being cast into the void. And with his apology to Barbara at the end, we see for the first time a softer, more caring side of the Doctor, as he now warmed up to the new companion. And from this point on, we can see them no longer being a reluctant group of travellers forced to stay together, but a group of friends.